Nemesis is an ancient concept, a kind of revenge that comes from above, from the divine, and tends to bring or restore balance, returning to the wrongdoer, to the one who committed a crime, what he had done before. Exactly, a revenge from above aiming to even things out. Nemesis is invoked in many cases, sometimes even inappropriately. This is done, for example, when a thief is in turn robbed of his loot, or when a murderer is killed by someone else. These are the concepts that restore balance to what the Easterners call karma. But can we talk about Nemesis when a criminal who has become a soldier and is long gone unpunished is killed?
Not directly
by his victims, but by those who have known terror because of him. I leave it to you to decide whether or not to talk about Nemesis. Our story begins in the courtyard of a prison on June 7th, 1945. The war in Europe has been over for a month. It is still ongoing in the Pacific. It will take a few more weeks. Well, what happens on June 7th, 1945, in a prison in Germany, the Althausen prison, managed by the Free France Army, in whose ranks there are several Czech and Polish soldiers. Just 2 Polish soldiers wearing French uniforms go to a cell, open it, and embrace the prisoner. This detainee is a bit of a special detainee, still wearing the uniform in which he was arrested.
a uniform.
As an Oberfuhrer of the Waffen-SS, the Oberfuhrer was an intermediate rank between that of colonel and that of brigadier general, without equivalents in the common army. This prisoner is a thin man, medium height, rather strong skull, with incipient baldness, with fairly prominent cheekbones, sparse hair. He's not even 50, though he may look older. It could be the beard, or the look in his eyes, who knows? Well, this prisoner is made to stand up and is told to follow the guards. He thinks he's being taken to an interrogation, maybe a transfer to another prison, who knows? The 2 guards escort him to the courtyard of the Althausen prison, but that courtyard is not empty. There's a lot of people, quite a few people in that courtyard, emancipated people, very poorly treated. People who, despite having little strength, manage to wield pieces of wood, stakes that have been pried from a nearby fence in their hands. That prisoner, that man who until that moment had remained fairly calm and quiet, widens his eyes in terror. He realizes it's a trap. He pleads with the 2 Polish soldiers to return him to his cell, not wanting to face that fate. 2 Polish soldiers pick him up and throw him into the center of the yard, almost as prey, to that emancipated but enraged crowd that begins to beat the prisoner to death. This is the horrible end of an ogre with human features, a monster, a man whose name meant terror. For much of Eastern Europe, a name that answered to Oskar Dirlewanger. Dirlewanger. He had been a soldier, a regular soldier. He had enlisted in the German Imperial Army during the Great War. He had been discharged, and at the end of the conflict, he had joined the Freikorps, those very timid paramilitary bodies that, after the end of the Great War, had set themselves a mission, that of crushing, suffocating in blood, any socialist or communist attempt in Germany. Well, in the Freikorps, Dirlewanger had found a new reason for living for a long time, until he had decided to also abandon that world, to return to studying, graduate, and then become a teacher himself. One could say an ordinary life of any German after the Great War, but there is a problem with Oskar Dirlewanger, because deep down, like a fire of a terrible vice, in 1934, when he was first arrested because the parents of a minor, just 13 years old, reported him for sexual violence against their daughter. Dirlewanger, who at that time had a promising career in teaching, had also taken the card of the Nazi Party, which had recently come to power in Germany. He is incarcerated. His war past is not enough to exonerate him or to lessen the extent of the charges. No, for 2 years, Oskar Dirlewanger is in prison, and when he comes out, he is a transformed man. First of all, he no longer has a job. In addition to having a job, his criminal record has made his inclinations public knowledge, and he also struggles with alcoholism. And after drinking, he harasses another girl. Not to mention me. Oskar Dirlewanger no longer crosses the hunters of the prison, but those of a concentrationslager. A concentration lager. A concentration camp. Yes, because the Nazi regime, which he had joined but which disowned him, does not look kindly on rapists. In short, it seems that Oskar Dirlewanger must become a pariah for the Nazi regime, except that something happens. Because just at that time, an old comrade of his from the Freikorps, named Gottlob Berger, who left his job as a gymnastics teacher to first join the Nazi Party and then the SS, has made a career in the SS. Not only has he become a big shot in the criminal police, the CRIPO, which just at that time is forcibly entering the Reichssicherheit 80, the huge Nazi repression machine headed by Reinhard Eidrich. Well, one day Berger, while opening some files of the CRIPO notices die. Dirlewanger, recalling an old friend and comrade from the Freikorps days, gets a somewhat peculiar idea. Remembering that Dirlewanger had been a good soldier, a good fighter, Berger decides to talk to the Reichsfuhrer of the SS, Himmler, proposing the creation of a sort of discipline department, those that in the army are called regiments. Discipline, that is, the units where reluctant soldiers, draft dodgers, deserters, but also criminals are channeled. To regiment them, give them discipline, and go to fight them, hoping that they can thus redeem themselves. This is Berger's theory. Can a criminal, moreover a recidivist, become a true Nazi? Indeed. Can he redeem himself? Can he find redemption through a uniform? Himmler thinks about it and then agrees to Berger's experiment on one condition only. This experiment does not take place in Germany. It's 1938. Germany is not yet at war. Neneto is missing. So, where can practice be done? To Oskar Dirlewanger? In Spain, that Spain which has been ablaze with a civil war since the summer of 1936. The Republic on one side and the Nationalists on the other, led by Francisco Franco. The ranks of the Nationalists are bolstered by the volunteer corps sent by Mussolini, of the strength of about 4 divisions, and by the Condor Legion, a German expeditionary force largely based on Luftwaffe personnel, but also ground personnel, advisors, military anti-aircraft. Plus, there's the third, which is the Spanish Foreign Legion. There they are made to rally many foreign fighters who want to take up arms for the cause of the Nationalists. Well, Dirlewanger finds himself outside the concentrationslager and in the uniform of the third. The goal is to fight, possibly survive, and prove that his old comrade Berger is right. While Oskar Dirlewanger emerges from his experience in Spain with a nice set of experiences. First of all, war wounds are always useful, even for getting decorations. Some commendations, a couple of reprimands for incidents of alcoholism in service, and also a charge for raping a girl. Tub, but this last one is conveniently made to disappear from his file. Who knows by whose hand, if by someone from the third, or by the will of a Francoist, or perhaps on the suggestion of some German military advisor. Who knows? The fact is that when Francisco Franco triumphantly enters Madrid, ending the Civil War in the spring of '39, Dirlewanger is free to go home, decorated, acclaimed like so many of his other comrades from the Condor Legion, and not only. Above all, his old friend Berger has shown that his theory has some validity. Dirlewanger has proven to be useful to the Nazi state as a soldier. So if it worked for him, this kind of war therapy might be replicated for others. Why not try again? Why not give an opportunity to other criminals who are in prisons or concentration camps, perhaps with a special unit?
Not of the
army, but of the SS, who are beginning, among other things, to plan the birth of what will be the Waffen. Well, it is created in the
short term.
In a few months, a unit, a kind of battalion entrusted to the command of Oskar Dirlewanger, which includes the worst that can be fished from prisons and concentration camps. All people who have been sentenced to either prison or even the guillotine, thieves, murderers, rapists, the worst of the worst, all dressed in an SS uniform and entrusted to Oskar Dirlewanger. The task of what will be called Sonderbattalion Dirlewanger, that is, the Dirlewanger Special Battalion, is that of territorial control and repression. The first field, so to speak, not of training but of application, is Poland. September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany attacks Poland and kicks off World War II. Behind the regular troops of the Wehrmacht, who fight on the field and conquer territory at an impressive speed, the first squads of the SS are called, including the Sonderbattalion Dirlewanger, which quickly becomes very famous, sadly famous. Why do the men of the Special Battalion rob, loot, burn villages, summarily kill whoever happens? It's a trail of blood and terror that this not entirely regular unit leaves behind, but still tolerated. These complaints that are coming more and more, not only from the Poles, but also from some Wehrmacht officers who are disgusted by what they see, or by what comes in the form of reports on their desks. These complaints reach all the way to the headquarters of General Governor Hans Frank at Wawel Castle in Krakow. They are quite heavy complaints. The irregular soldiers, including Oskar Dirlewanger and his men, reject being grouped together. So in a short time, after Operation Barbarossa has started, that is, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Special Dirlewanger Battalion is moved to the east, in Belarus, and here too free reign. In a short time, the men of Dirlewanger, or rather the criminals of Oskar Dirlewanger, destroy everything they find. Under the pretext of wanting to root out the partisans, there are well over 200 villages that are devastated, destroyed, burned, razed to the ground, and there are tens of thousands of victims of the battalion. Civilians, innocent, men, women, elderly, children. No distinction is made. It makes no difference. Everyone is massacred. At this point, Dirlewanger has now become a celebrity, a very sinister celebrity from his victims, but very appreciated by the regime, which, given the relative success of this very particular unit, decides to expand its ranks. From a battalion, it moves to a regiment. There are over 1,000 men, a regiment that remains in the rear until the spring of 1943. But after the defeat at Stalingrad, and with the first offensive move by the Red Army toward the west, it suddenly finds itself on the front line, supporting the effort of the Army Group and containing the Soviet counteroffensive. It's clear that a supposedly military unit, but that doesn't have the right training, sometimes not even the right equipment, and thus is unprepared for modern war, must suffer heavy losses. And so the battalion is decimated, losing over 60% of its strength, before being withdrawn from the front line and sent to the rear to replenish its ranks. How? But always drawing recruits from prisons, whether they are military or civilian prisons, it doesn't matter. The important thing is that they are always convicted criminals. The nature is not changed. If anything, its strength is increased until it essentially becomes a brigade. It comes to count 3,000 men, many equipped with light weapons, and also a bit of heavy weapons, even anti-tank weapons. In the summer of 1944, between late July and early August, Dirlewanger presented another significant opportunity for the Armia Krajowa, the Polish National Army. The patriots of General Bohr revolt against the Germans and start what is called the Warsaw Uprising, a revolt that will last several weeks. The Poles see the arrival of the Soviets, who, however, establish themselves on the Vistula and do not cross the river, as a signal, the possibility of taking the initiative to free themselves from their capital in view of a new advance of the Soviets and the arrival of the Allies. It was a strategically wrong move because Stalin will not want to help them, and Churchill, who would like to go to their rescue, will not have the possibility to even bring them material. While the Germans react ruthlessly, brutally against the Poles who dared to rise up. If the army uses any means, even the monstrous giant Calgerit mortars, to demolish entire buildings or entire blocks, well, after the bombings, it's free hand to tell Wangera to his men who can enter the neighborhoods of Warsaw, move among the rubble, and give in to any greed. They indiscriminately massacre anyone who happens to be in their line of fire. What was a revolt for freedom becomes a bloodbath, and the repression carried out by Dirlewanger is so effective that the German High Command sends his men even to Slovakia. Months later, as Slovakia attempts to break from the Axis, another massacre occurs there as well. The merits, in quotes, are so high that Himmler himself rewards Dirlewanger with the rank of Oberführer, as we said, a rank between colonel and brigadier general. And in February 1945, he creates the 36th Waffen-Grenadier Division of the SS, that is, the old special battalion. Dirlewanger becomes a real own division of the Waffen-SS, a division that Dirlewanger can rely on for just one day, just enough time to be injured against the Russians. Brigade Führer Fritz Schmiedes, already a second in command, takes his place. Despite having a rank superior to him, Schmiedes was initially supposed to be just a military advisor. When Dirlewanger is injured, he decides to take the reins of that so battered division. And that begins to fall apart, with an entire regiment deciding to mutiny, massacre their own commander, and run away, heading west. Schmiedes knows very well that if the Soviets get their hands on the SS, they are those from the concentration camps. The Waffen kill indiscriminately. It's a vendetta. The only hope for that department is to go west and surrender to the Allies, hoping for a bit of mercy. In the meantime, Oskar Dirlewanger is in the hospital. He needs to be treated. On May 4th, 1945, with the war about to end, Oskar Dirlewanger leaves the hospital, puts his uniform back on, and surrenders. Dirlewanger is convinced that the French will show him mercy. Perhaps he hopes they have never heard his name or that of his unit. Dirlewanger didn't consider the fact that among the French there are many Poles and Czechs, many Bohemians, people who have heard of him, of their own countrymen, perhaps their own family members who have survived, people who have an open account, an account that will have to be settled with blood and will be settled with blood. That June 7th, 1945, in that prison, in that courtyard, from a group of survivors of the concentration camps, Poles, Jews, blind people, Slovaks, people who wanted to take revenge. The issue arises precisely with Dirlewanger's death. It seems strange, but like all legends, even the legend of the Nazi ogre survives. It survives the real ogre. Because it will take years to admit the death of Oskar Dirlewanger. The French will have to exhume his body, buried in the courtyard of that prison, have a dental examination performed. At the time, DNA tests were not yet available to debunk the black legend of the ogre. Yes, because during all that period from 1945
until the
end of the 50th, Oskar Dirlewanger is spotted everywhere. It's his ghost that hovers. Some say that he disguised himself as a monk and returned to Spain, perhaps taking advantage of some old soldier of the Tercio who would have protected him. Some say that in reality he joined Otto Skorzeny, the king of the SS Commandos, or that he escaped to Argentina through the Odessa network. There is even an unlikely testimony, yet long believed to be true, according to which Oskar Dirlewanger was spotted in Cairo, Egypt, drinking orange juice with some Egyptian officers, disciples of Gamal Abdel Nasser, and some German scientists who went to that country to collaborate on Nasser's missile program. All legends, all dark legends that scare, like when you try to terrorize children by telling them to behave well. Otherwise, the ogre will come to take them away. With the ogre Dirlewanger, he really existed. The dark legend about him was true. The legends born after his death only served to increase the aura of terror that he had spread over half of Europe in his lifetime. Even today, in many villages of Poland, Slovakia, Belarus, Ukraine, the elders remember the name Dirlewanger, a name that makes them tremble, a name that reminds them. A period of violence, looting, fires, summary executions. The man who had become an ogre. Dirlewanger was an ogre not like that of fairy tales. No, a human ogre at the head of a band of butchers. When it is said that sometimes history imitates art, it is also the
dark case,
sad, extremely painful of men like Oskar Dirlewanger.
Thank you.